Hi, Nigel. Right, good to see you again. I suppose probably the starting point is the regular briefings that ARMA have been giving to members. I mean, one of the things that I thought was quite noticeable was the fact that you were actually connected with other similar organisations across the globe. I thought it'd be useful to sort of talk about how those relationships have started and what benefits it's kind of brought to the UK experience.
Of course, yeah, no. It really started, I went out to Brisbane last September to try and find out more about Strata, because obviously it's akin to Commonhold. It's used as the model. And I didn't feel I understood it enough. So that was a big reason to go out. It just was one of these coincidences that I happened to be invited to a conference in sunny Brisbane on it, and spent 3 days out there, which was great, and made contacts. The first thing I did was go to a lady called Alicia Fisher, who was the head of their version of ARMA nationally. Then it turns out they also have statewide versions of it as well. So I met with about 5 or 6 people there, and it, again, perhaps coincidentally, but Tom Skibo of the American Apartments Association was there, and we bumped into each other. So it just started off from that. And then when COVID started cracking off over here, as you mentioned, what I wanted to do was for ARMA to become a source of regular, sort of consistent information for our members, so they wouldn't have to scrabble around and try and find out what was going on. So I started at first weekly calls, each of them about an hour, and I would do 3 of those a week to different groups. They're now down to monthly because COVID, it's still with us, but it's not changing as dramatically as it did, and we're not having to learn quite so quickly. So I started those off to start talking to the members and bring them up to speed. But it struck me that my friends in America and Australia and Scotland would be having the same problem. So reached out to them and said, why don't we chat? And what was very interesting was, hardly surprising, they did have the same problems, but different scales in a sense. And then we brought in Pepe from Spain, and it was early on, I'm not kidding, it was harrowing, because he would tell us what was happening in Spain, the mass graves, all this sort of stuff. And I'd have trouble sleeping after talking to Pepe. But it gave us ideas of what was heading this way, because Spain precedes us by a couple of weeks, and Australia and America follow us by a couple of weeks. So by swapping, what are we doing? And I would send out information that I had or that we created. I can come on to some of that a bit later on, for them to use, which they found very useful. Or, good old Pepe would say, the government's just announced that people are allowed out in public pools. And of course, what's happening is everybody with a private residence with a private pool is saying, I can use the pool. And the managing agents are going, no, you can't. It's the public the government we're talking about. So we would have conversations with HCLG saying, in Spain, when the government did this, they weren't crisp and clear enough with their information, and it created chaos. So please, when you do start to unravel, be very, very careful how you say things. So it really all sort of came together, and we still talk now once on a monthly basis. And that's how it came across.
And so are you feeding this back to government as well? Because, I mean, clearly, our own government, you are having to make things up on the hoof. That's not a criticism. That's just the way life is. And sometimes regulation and advice, the thought behind it and the reality of implementing it from managing agent can be difficult.
Yeah, so we get the government advice, and I'll give full credit here to Jacqueline Thorburn, who was bringing all this together. I would send her information, she'd collate it. And we put, first of all, on our public website, a document to sort of help agents. And that wasn't just for managing agents, it was a bit wider than that. And we'd put all the government advice, the links and so forth, and then we'd try and fill in the gaps where property management, because the government can't do everything. And as you say, I feel sorry for them. They had to make this up as they were going along. They hadn't really prepared for this. That's on version 14 on our website at the moment, so you can see how many times it's changed. I also I still do talk every 2 weeks, regular as clockwork, with MHCLG. We tell them what's going on in the industry. We give them warnings. So again, from America, for example, where they didn't have the furlough scheme, they were starting to find that defaults on the community charges were really, really affecting the funding of buildings. So we had the furlough over here, which helped, But in my weekly calls with members, I was taking polls saying, how are your service charge defaults compared to last year? Because we wanted to see if there was starting to be a problem. Because as we explained to MHCLG, and if you let me say I'm trendy here, we had some calls with number 10 as well, because they were concerned about this, because they were saying what would happen if you couldn't collect the service charges. And we're going, well, buildings insurance could fail, cleaning can fail, concierge security could fail. It's not like rental holidays, because there was talk about perhaps we should give service charge holidays. We managed to say that's absolutely not what you should do. And we just keep them updated on the feedback from our members about how that's happening. And the other one that was very interesting, they were saying about getting Britain back to work. So another poll we regularly take is, how are you engaging with your contractors? Same as last year, or is it a bit lower, etc., to give the government the sort of the temperature of how our industry is helping Britain get back to work, which is something they're obviously very, very interested in as well.
Okay, and you, as a managing agent, one of the big things that is important to us is communication. And we're very keen on making sure that we keep our residents advised as much as we can. But at the moment, advice is, I suppose, difficult to give because the situation changes so quickly. From an association, how are you sort of guiding members generally, and what are you doing to sort of actually help us get our message across to leaseholders? Because often there is a lack of understanding as to what a managing agent can and can't do, and I think often people confuse us with sort of utility companies or local authorities. Yeah,
there's a variety of ways we can help. For example, just practical things. Some of the smaller firms would come to me and say, our client really wants us to attend an AGM in person. What do you think? And we could say, don't do it. And then it allows them to go back to the client and say, look, it's not just us being difficult. Our trade association says we shouldn't do it. So don't blame me. So we have no authority per se to do that, but it helps them to navigate with their clients and kind of say, this is a bit wider than the rest of us. Outside of that, we do our monthly circulars are now weekly, so we try and put in everything we can there. We didn't think of doing it as things happen, but we felt that was bombarding people. If something once a week, you can sit down and sort of spend 20 minutes reading it, whereas if something comes in every day, twice a day, you start to ignore them, which is always a danger. We try and think ahead, so we came up, and again, credit to Jacqueline on this, the cool document coming out of lockdown. So that was we got a managing agent in, a health and safety expert, 2 health and safety experts, and published a document brainstorming about how do we get our own offices back, so how do we bring our own staff, but how do we then get property managers out to sites as well and keep that as safe as possible. So and I did say I wanted it really snappy, and it turned out to be 6 pages of A4, and that was as tight as we could get it, because that's what we're finding. There's so much that goes on there. The weekly calls, I've had a huge amount of positive feedback on that, and how they are basically, I look at the global panorama to give people an idea of what's happening in the economy, then look at the UK economy, then UK property, and then also just down to property management. So I sit in on the calls with the UK Apartments Association to learn about BTR, and that's really interesting because they get speakers in talking about the potential collapse in commercial retail spaces and so forth, and the knock-on effects that could have. So try and combine all of that, condense it down into an hour. It's quite exhausting. It takes about 6 or 7 hours of preparation to do that one thing, and then, as you know, to speak on your own for an hour straight into a camera with no feedback is a bit weird. But thank you. People really liked it, and I'll keep doing it after COVID's been and gone, because I think it's a great way for the association to keep in touch with its members. And it's feedback as well, because a really good bit is we watch the questions coming in and obviously try and answer them. But it gives an idea. Again, we're sort of a bit remote from it. I haven't run a property management firm for 6 years now. It's really nice for me to hear what's going on the ground. So that's very important too.